How many of y'all snaps and claps if you've seen Black Panther? All right, all right. So that's basically everybody. Um, and I think that's probably the most recent visible representation of what we can say that looks like as far as prominent black people or people of African descent that are doing what one would call futuristic things with regards to STEM and technology. So there is this new, I'm going to call it a new wave of positive portrayal of blacks in media, right? And I think the first revolution of that, at least in my generation, that is probably the one that we all can do more snaps and claps on would be Hidden Figures. Did snaps and claps? Okay. So again, women scientists, right? And that showed not just our little girls and boys that, hey, we did this. That's in the past. That's not even in the future. But we can do this. So as we think about all of our relative experiences about what the future can and does hold, what does that mean for today? So I am more about how are we making impact for black and brown kids today, because the future is absolutely now. And what happened in Black Panther didn't seem that far-fetched to me, because I was like, that main girl was from Chicago. She's from Crib. So, all right, let's. I'm excited. Let's get into some real conversation. So, my first question, I wanna throw it over to Alisha. So, UCLA Center for Scholars and Storytellers is one of the leading edge of how positive and inclusive storytelling in media can help the next generation thrive, right? Mm-hmm. So what does media representation, in your view, how does that affect viewers, and what is the benefit of seeing positive images of representation in STEM and of people of color, I'm going to say?
Yeah, definitely. So many benefits, right? I'll start with a little personal anecdote because I think it's relevant, but my favorite movie of all time is Spike Lee's Crooklyn.
Yes.
Like, of all time. So I was probably 11 or 12, and my dad's like, sit down and watch this movie. I think you're going to like it. Mm-hmm. And I was, floored, like, fell in love with Troy Carmichael, this, kind of tomboyish little black girl exploring herself and her girlhood, navigating this really complicated family dynamic and community. And I had never seen myself represented, right, like in that way in a film or a television show. I watched it probably like every day for, the next year as much as my parents would let me. And I'm sure many people, in this room have that kind of experience of seeing something that was so powerful and transformative, right, like at these younger stages, right, of adolescence. And so this period when, our minds are kind of developing, this is an important stage of identity formation, an important stage of understanding your place in the world, what's possible for you and for your community. And so when we think about the early stages of adolescence, for example, young people are beginning to understand, like, the difference between themselves, and the people that they're seeing at school, be it, in terms of their gender identity or their sexual identity. And then as you get into kind of 14 to 17, they're beginning to negotiate that identity and internalize, what these messages that they're getting from the outside world mean for them. And so this is why media for young people in these incredibly important stages is so impactful, right? Because they're actually shaping who they are and shaping their perception of the world. And I think for minority adolescents, specifically black adolescents, there's also this kind of parallel process of racial identity formation that's happening and racial socialization that's happening. And I think that kind of mediates sometimes what they see on screen, right? So, like, young black kids know that representations of black people matter, right? They learn this when they're, 14 to 17. It's like, okay, if a white person sees this representation of me and my community on screen, this could impact the way, that they think about me, my outcomes. But then they kind of have this parallel understanding of who they are, right? Their cultural heritage, this curiosity about their background. and their race and their ethnic identity. And so I think this is why for Black adolescents in particular, we have to think about media a little bit more carefully and be a little more deliberate about the kind of messages that we're giving. And I think Afrofuturism and the way it's portrayed in something like Black Panther and Wakanda is this really powerful intersection of, this kind of identity formation that's happening, and then, also this curiosity about the world, but that's rooted in an authentic and tangible kind of lived experience. So that's why I think, this conversation is really good to learn kind of about, what you guys are thinking about Afrofuturism in the STEM world, but then, how young people are seeing this on screen, right, and how it's shaping how they think of themselves.
Absolutely. Taylor, Brenda, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, from the K through 12 perspective, like I said, I'm from Texas, so we've all heard about the policies that are being created that are removing stories from textbooks and libraries. And, now in a digital world, it's even easier to grab something out and almost erase it. And so when you think about the role that media plays, it's almost now more important than ever, because a student doesn't have to ask a teacher permission to go into Netflix. So, that's a point I'm going to continue to go back to, is about how we are impacting students' lives outside of the systems that have been built to kind of control what they think about themselves and how we see each other.
That's a word. No,
I mean, mic drops. I got mic drops. This is going to be a panel of mic drops. So the need for tech workers, so I'm going to define tech broadly in the sense of the T in STEM, and anything computing, not just computer science. So tech is broader than computer science. So we're going to talk cyber, we're going to talk cloud, we're going to talk AI, we're going to talk gaming. Tech is all of that, right? And so the need for tech is going to grow by 90% over the next 15 years. And so we can't possibly, as of today, we don't have enough workers to fulfill the need that is going to continue to grow. And I think this year, or I'll start last year when some of us were introduced to ChatGPT and other things like that, where we saw that this is really going to accelerate what the future being now, right? So how are we preparing Black and brown communities to be part of the future, not, as I like to say, not get left out of the future, which is now. So data from Reboot, we were founded because there was a lack. And so you're going to hear me say the term BLNA for Black, Latino, Native American. So BLNA women represented 4% of the graduating population with computing degrees in 2017. And that was down by 33% from the previous decade. Yes, down. And so we were the call to action. Reboot was the call to action after the report was released to say, okay, we have to do more, at least, well, there's a lot of things that need to be done, but with philanthropic dollars, that's one thing that we can do more with. So excited that the numbers are growing, but one of the key things is representation, right? So representation matters, visibility matters, access matters. And so as we're thinking about what we can continue to do to provide the things that are in our power, and this is a room of powerful people, so I want y'all to be thinking about, what do I have the power to change with regards to visibility, access, representation for the youth and for my peers? So Brandon, I'm throwing it over to you.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on whether media can influence what Black learners can pursue as far as fast-growing tech jobs in this space, and what does that mean with regards to your work?
So again, for our work, working with Black boys and young men, I think two major themes come up in this regard. One is recentering, and the other is necessity. So recentering first, at the risk also of stepping on some of your very important and critical and informative facts that you presented, sometimes we do need to recenter our orientation to them, right, and understand, for example, oftentimes people will articulate who Black young people are, who our communities are with respect to, for example, tech and STEM as a function of what we're not or where they believe we're not caught up to or some metric. But when I just hang out around, not even just the young people we work with, when I think about where I got my first computer from in my household, the very first one, my uncle built. The second one, a Black woman named Jenny built, and she built our third one too. And Jenny had been in tech for a hot minute. Now, I got my computer, we were 8, 9 years old, right? And that second and third computer, that's 13 and 14. Miss Jenny had been through tech and already been up out of there, and you also had that data too. I know you didn't touch on it, but the levers, right? The tech
Yes,
lever.
exactly that.
But where she was moving around wasn't a space that could hold advanced support and make her feel welcome during that time. So she had to get it out the mud and do it herself, right? And so then we'll look up and be like, well, if only there were more who understood and who knew, there'd be more here. But Jenny had been on that tech, right? And then I knew, like, the first person who taught me DOS was my auntie. You know, so we just keep going down the line, like, all these things. We've been in it, but the need to recenter is so we don't always center the gaze of then the core kind of quote-unquote valley companies or companies that are led by folks that don't have an understanding or affinity or belief in the power of who we are, right? Meaning we've been in tech. Like, the fact that Black Panther is a thing isn't because somebody finally sat down and wrote it to us and showed us and we were like, that's a good idea. It was the manifestation of the way we were living our lives. And so I think necessity is that other piece. What's driven us to be so innovative, and Nielsen does, you know, have data, for example, on Black young people, you know, 16 to 34, who effectively lead the world in tech early adoption and the willingness to teach other young people and other people tech, and obviously content creation and setting trends, et cetera. And they keep releasing these studies every year, and every year it bears out the same, in large part because, as a matter of necessity, hearkening back to even conversations with Nicole Hannah-Jones, right, earlier, you know, when you're not part of a democracy, part of a project, you got to create your own project. So that's kind of what we do. We create new stuff and try and find, and then when it doesn't seem new anymore, we got to create something else, right? Because we feel like somebody played it out. So I think when you look at media representation, you look at a Black Panther or whatever it is, it's certainly affirming and reinforcing. And at the same time, I think when we need to kind of figure out the next steps or try and create context for our young people, a lot of it is just around saying, let's build what you need. Let's see that as an opportunity. So it's not about trying to perform, you know, Microsoftism or Metaism, or, you know what I'm saying? There's an entire continent, right, that actually represents the fastest growing youth population in the world, the fastest growing employment population in the world, that is every day solidifying infrastructure to do commerce, to do payments, et cetera. And if people then need like a conference or a session to figure out why it would be a good idea to build for that population, then those might not be the people we need to be tapping in with, but that's your opportunity. If that's your cousin in Nigeria, if that's your people in Nairobi, if that's your people in Kigali and Cape Town or whatever, then why don't you build to meet your need and build off your interests and what excites you, and then see that as your market. And if we need to like convince somebody through a movie that is going down over there, okay, but if they don't believe you, just go get the bag anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Right?
that's how I feel about it.
Mic drops. Mic drops.
Yeah.
So real quick, I think that you guys know that we all represent a sliver of what we're trying to work towards with tech. So you heard me say intentionally BLNA women, and everybody's sliver that they've already said. We're not in competition. This is how do we all work together to move us forward, right? And so with me being, I'm gonna say hyper-focused on women and Brandon being hyper-focused on men, that's not putting one over the other. That's us then collaborating on how we move our people together forward. So I just wanted to make sure that that was a mic drop stated thing, that this is about how we all work together. So I want to ask the same question to Taylor with regards to your vision and your work, and what does that relate to, and how do you see the media really progressing Black workers and learners?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, just a short story. I was the youngest of 7 kids to all earn a Division I scholarship to play sports in college. Part of you would wonder, like, how in the world, what were your parents doing? What was in the water? Was it Texas? What was it? And the truth is, my father had used Mac computers in the 80s to design dope headwear. So he was responsible for, like, if you look back to Usher or NWA or any of those hats that they were wearing in the 80s and 90s, his company was responsible for changing the headwear and the sports athleisure wear game. And with all of that said, all my parents knew to do in having used their education and entrepreneurship to make it out of poverty was to put me in the best schools possible. So that meant private schools where I was one of 2 Black people in a school of like 100 other kids that did not look like me, but just to give me a leg up and an opportunity. Now, with all of that said, I had access to computers. I think about all of the cool movies that came out in the 80s and 90s, whether you're talking about whatever the Wayans Bros movie were when he was like the superhero. There's just so many great representation of Black joy and Black happiness and people thriving and not struggling, right?
Absolutely.
And so I mentioned that at some point Grey's Anatomy came out, and I'm in, like, I don't know if it was middle school. I think I was in 5th grade when it came out. And I was inspired by the stories. And it wasn't just the stories of the Black characters on the screen. It was the stories of the gay characters on the screens and the good-looking men that were the plastic surgeons that people were obsessed with. That's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be the plastic surgeon that everybody was calling McSteamy or McDreamy. So, you know, transitioning that, what is not acceptable for us is to just inspire our kids and to leave them there. Because that's where I was. I was inspired to become a plastic surgeon. Everybody in my family knew it. Everybody at school knew what I wanted to do. But at the same time, I had somebody that dropped the ball, my 10th grade math teacher that literally did not teach us anything. And I was in one of the best schools in Texas. And so then I earned this Division I scholarship. I'm doing what we were taught in our community, that athletics or entertainment can get us out of poverty and keep our families out of poverty. So I did all the things that the world told us we needed to do. I got to the place that I was supposed to get to. And now at Loyola Marymount University on a scholarship that was valued at minimum $53,000 a year, so $200,000. I'm in a pre-med pathway, and it wasn't until I'm sitting in a college chemistry class and I'm like, whew, chemistry is math. Why didn't anybody tell me this? You know, so with that said, I think the most important thing about my message is that at that point in time, I ended up losing my scholarship. I'm the baby of 7 that all did this thing. And now when I look back at my brothers and sisters who followed that pathway that media told us that we should follow, it wasn't enough. My oldest brother has passed away. He was on one of the best football teams of all time, playing in Nebraska. He was drastically overweight in his career. He didn't have access to the mental health services that he needed. I could go down the list of stories of what seems like failure as far as like making it to that pinnacle and not being able to turn that key and fully succeed. And so with all of that said, my biggest message is media is fabulous and wonderful, but now we need to take a step deeper. Now what we're looking at in our work is how do you meet kids in video games where they are? We've all been playing video games for the last 20 and 30 years, whether it's Madden, whether it's NBA 2K, whether it's Grand Theft Auto, or any of the things that we've been doing. And how do we say that we're not going to skimp on these kids and we're going to actually invest the capital that's needed in order to bring career exploration in a video game? And if you're asking, well, what's the purpose of that, Taylor? Like, tell me about this video game thing. Everybody remembers the first time they walked into a space where nobody else looked like them. A lot of times you remember the first time you're sitting in a board meeting and you don't know whether is it the Roberts Rule of Orders? I always get it confused, okay, right? Like, you don't know what you're supposed to do, but imagine a world where you can walk in and you can see artwork that's depicting you in all of your glory. And then imagine talking to an avatar that looks like you, sounds like you, and dresses like you, but is introducing you to a space that you've never met before, whether that's an entrepreneur in tech or whether that's a plastic surgeon. And in this safe environment where you belong and all these barriers have been removed, you're now able to navigate from wherever you are in the world, whatever zip code you live in, and you don't have to ask anybody permission to become anything that you want to. So, yeah, I know that was a long answer to your question, but media is great. Now we just need to take a step deeper and really meet these kids where they are.
Ooh. I love how you brought it to video games. That's, for those that don't know, that's part of my origin story as well. So my dad worked for Atari when I was a toddler. And then the ground moved one too many times when we moved back to Chicago. And then he worked for Bally. But we had a testing game simulator in our home, right? And as I tell this story, and my uncles were, because my uncles worked there as well, my dad's first cousins also worked there, they were like, we still don't know how your dad got that game simulator in the house. So apparently, you know, there was some other stuff. But as a second grader, third grader, the way that we changed out these games was changing out the motherboards because it was a test simulator. So imagine me as a little kid swapping out hardware, using canned air to clean it, and as I love to share, we were the coolest house on the block until Nintendo came out. And then we had to learn a whole new thing, right? But it was that early exposure, just like what you're talking about, right? This is not new, that allowed my brother and I to be introduced to the world of tech. And so I think what we want for our children now, because our children, all the children now are tech native, right? This is nothing for them. But we don't want our children to just be consumers of tech. We want them to be creators and innovators of tech. So, Dr. Hines, what would you like to add with regards to media and
there's a couple things that both of you said that really resonated with me. Taylor, you spoke about kind of getting to a certain position and like in your education, right? And then not having anyone to tell you what to do next, right? Like neither of my parents graduated from college, and like I have a Ph.D. obviously, but you know, like no one could tell me how to navigate that space, you know, and I was educated at predominantly white institutions, so I was kind of like this fish out of water. And my sister went to an HBCU, and then my parents were like, you can't go to one because we can't afford it. Like, you need to go to a school where you can get financial aid and take out all these loans, you know, and have access to these resources, because we just can't do that again. And so it put me in a position where I had to sort of figure it out, right? And then I was kind of led down this path of like, you know, the humanities and liberal arts. But I that really resonated, that you have to, you know, be there to support. Like we can get so far on our own, and young people are so, you know, creative and inspired and excited, but you know, you need that support to kind of take it to that next level. And then also to Brandon's point about Black folks, Black adolescents being early adopters of tech, right? Like the research has shown that for years, right? And Black adolescents report almost at twice the level of white adolescents, that they are nearly constantly online, right? And in front of screens, and people get afraid of those statistics sometimes. But I think if we have this more asset-based framing, right, and approach to that, as opposed to thinking about it as a deficit, right, or this is why, you know, they're not achieving, you know, in terms of that's why there's these education gaps or anything like that. Like, no, those are structural, systematic, you know, issues. But them being on screens is actually allowing them to connect and express themselves and explore their identities and learn new things that they don't have access to. So I think that's a really important point. But yeah, I don't have a conclusion, but both of you just like made me think of those two things.
Awesome. So we would obviously be remiss if we did not talk about AI. So to use or not to use, and it's been banned in higher ed institutions. New York said you can't use it, and as well as other both elementary, K-12, post-secondary institutions. And that was their fearful reaction to the future, which is current. So it's not new, but I'm going to say it in the context. How are we looking at the evolution, which we're going to call AI, and gaming as how we can make sure that we integrate, not leave out, incorporate, continue to learn, continue to advance, and leverage it as our platform. So, Taylor, I'm throwing this over to you. With gaming and AI representing two additional forms of media, I'm going to put air quotes around the additional, right? So how are learners reacting to this unique form of academic engagement? And what do you believe is the future of gaming and AI?
That's a big question.
I believe the future of gaming and AI is it will completely transform the way that we learn. It's proven that in a simulated environment, that because you're able to touch on multiple learning styles and modalities, that you're able to capture the attention and engagement of more learners. So my prediction is that one day people will say, what is a textbook? That's what our kids will say. And they will start understanding that the power of gaming is not just in spending time on Roblox and other things, but the power of gaming is to learn. And the last thing I'll quickly touch on, because I know we're running out of time here, is that our teachers need help. And if we were to put ourselves in the position of, let's say this is Taylor's classroom, and I'm looking at all of you, it doesn't matter how much time I've spent with you, I don't know what you're doing in a digital world when you're outside of my classroom. But when I allow you to operate your life, the way you play, the way you think, the way you learn in this virtual environment, and I'm able to help you track every accomplishment and every creation and every minute that you've talked to somebody to help you understand yourself better, that's the power of personalization. And so my belief is that we will exist in a future where every single one of us, it doesn't matter if we are in K through 12, higher education, or we're adults that have find ourselves anywhere in our educational journey, that we'll each have a personalized learning companion that operates kind of like a GPS navigator. It's not showing us 1,000 different streets, because you don't need to know the 1,000 streets. You need to set a destination, and then no matter what turn you take or what misroute you take, it's constantly analyzing you and who you are and giving you the very next step that you need to do and the very next step. So I believe that AI and gaming is the way that we can recreate our physical world and design it in a way that it was meant to be designed, where you've removed all accessibility barriers. It doesn't matter if you have a disability that can be seen or unseen. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, your sexuality, your gender, but there is an equal place for us all. Like, I love Tupac's Thug's Mansion. Like, there's a place where all of us can reside and have this. Don't get me singing that, but I like the acoustic version, by the way.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, that's my
okay.
prediction on AI and video games.
I feel you on that.
All right, so we got a wrap, and we're gonna open it up for questions. So hopefully this has been thought provoking. But what I have a pet peeve of is for this to be the choir, because we all have a like mind, and we're there. You're learning, but we're there, right? And so we're not necessarily trying to convince you. And so what I want each of my panelists to do is give one action to the audience that they can walk away with today based off of the future being now.
Do you
I'm
have
sorry, I
one
didn't prepare. That was off script. My bad.
You wanna go?
already? If you have one already, go ahead.
Not yet. It's brewing. But go. You can.
Connect with us at STEMULI Studios.
Yeah.
Got Kyrie Kemp and Naomi Thomas sitting back in the second to last row, but we're passionate about this work. We've got some amazing partners even in this room representing Dallas, but there's nothing that's going to stop us in what we want to do. You can find us at any of our first names at stimuli.net, but we're serious about this work, and if you're serious about change, then there's a way that we can link together on all levels to support learners in this space.
I would say advocate for Black and brown storytellers and content creators however you can. That this conversation about AI, it's a little scary to me, as like I kind of identify as a writer as well. And you know, at CSS we collaborate with a lot of advocacy organizations that represent and promote creators of color, content creators of color, producers, writers, directors, etc. And it's, you know, they're on strike currently, and you know, AI is a part of the negotiations, you know, that they're having with the Writers Guild, because they are replacing a lot of jobs that never really existed for people of color in these spaces to begin with. And so automating these processes is a bit challenging, right, to figure out what that looks like. Not that we just can get rid of AI or should not have it, because, you know, I'm very interested in new tech, you know, crypto, all that stuff. So it's exciting for me, and I use it, so, you know, in some ways as a thought partner, but it is something that we should be careful about, right, and think about in terms of the bias that is introduced into these systems that are, you know, based on data that is already biased, and, you know, a society that is unequal. So yeah, I would say hire Black writers, content creators, because that authenticity piece, this last point, is really important for young people as well, right? They need to see themselves represented in real ways in order to be inspired and motivated and to learn and to grow. And so you can only do that by having people who look like them and have experiences that are similar to them behind the screen and creating these narratives. So that's something we can't ever forget.
Real rap. I would say, I think, just going back to that theme of recentering or reframing, especially in this room, and especially for those of us who identify as from the diaspora, just to keep giving ourselves as individuals some grace, give our community some grace and some credit. A lot of times these things will come, and especially in tech does extremely, when I say tech, I mean like mainstream Silicon Valley, tech bro, white male kind of cis tech that you see, that we call tech, but tech is all of us and everything. And so one, recognizing that, but when it comes out, like when you see Sam Altman do a drop around OpenAI and ChatGPT, there's this practice of creating a natural mystification, because I can commodify and commoditize and monetize a mystification of a tech. If I take ownership of it and I say now I'm AI and everybody rolls with me is AI, then you're not AI. And if you say, well, I work in workforce, I work in public housing, I work in whatever, then clearly I'm not in tech. I'm just out here working with these babies. Like, but no, like you are in the space that's going to inform this tech. What Ms. Taylor described is only possible insofar as we are all in there. What Sam Altman won't tell you right now is AI sucks in large part because the people who have built it and trained it suck. Okay, and I mean no disrespect to any of them and their moms or anything. I just mean like the approach to it. You can't say it's sentient. I know we talk about mamas. You can't say it's sentient. You can't say it's representative. You can't say it's self or reliant, right, or independent if it only represents with this much of like neuro activity, but this much of the people and lived experience, what have you. So it requires us to feel ourselves from time to time, or even if you're supporting a young person or a learner or a worker, whomever, and a potential earner, say, hey, whatever you are into for your GPS, if that's you, then let's make you great at that, because that's going to contribute to the field. That's going to also help you distinguish your value as a writer, because for all the things AI can do, we know a lot of things it cannot do, right? The hallucinations, the misrepresentations, but that's, again, because it's one or but a limited number of ways of tracking information or processing. And basically, if you juxtapose that with the data on like how we engage with media as Black young people, the way we operate is the exact opposite of how they train AI, right? Because we're like, the second you see a pattern, hit it right. You know what I'm saying? If you see it start to trend like that, like, it's like, okay, we're going to max out on this, like, Popeyes, chicken sandwich situation. We're going to hit a left. You haven't heard about a Popeyes chicken sandwich in 3 or 4 years, right? Not because they didn't taste as good. Just people were like, nah, people, like, wore that out. So we made a left. I was talking to, my Philadelphia people in the back, right? You said, John, they wore John out. They put it on Abbott Elementary. And now we got to do something with John because we can't have John. So if I'm training AI and I'm the person who put John on a hoodie and called it VC John, like I'm limiting the power of this AI. That means that if I'm in here saying I'm not in tech, but I'm just, no, you are actually informing the future, whatever the tech needs to be. So you have to own that. Yes. So I think that part is important.
Yes. AI can't replace Black genius.
That's true. That's true.
Facts. That's a mic drop. I want to leave time for questions. Are there any questions? Because we can keep talking. There's no shortage of thoughts and opinions.
Hi. I'm still thinking about your question about how can we collaborate together. So I'm Dr. Hines. I run an entrepreneurship program, and we're also a building partner. And I'm constantly challenged by how to create representation in startups for young people of color. Right? And I also want to use VR and games. So my question to you is, given the power in the room, how can we collaborate together? Beyond liking, following, and all of that, what are you up to in the next 6 months so that I can get, digital writers, like, I want to access them and work with them. I want to get your solution to our participants. I want them to have that VR experience. But I don't want to create it myself. So I tend to, because I'm an engineer and former college professor, but I want to really collaborate in a very practical, deep way. So that's what I've been thinking.
Thank you. Yes, so with that, everybody needs two meaningful connections. One needs to come out of this room. So you're probably sitting next to your peoples, and that's great. But before you leave this room, talk to somebody that you don't know and figure out how y'all can work together. They've already dropped a few things that are coming up. With Reboot, we have a report coming out in July. It's focused on policies and practices that are intentionally focused on recruiting, retaining, and advancing ELNA women in industry, because as you alluded to the numbers, they're horrible. But we're seeing numbers go up with regards to baccalaureate degree graduation, and at the same time, we're leaving industry because we're, for a million reasons, right? But there's more to come, lots of collaboration. That's a good point. Other questions?
I would also just mention quickly, collaboration on entrepreneurship. I think one way to make those work, right, aside from aligning interests, and is collaborating on a way to get to the actual capital, then to create that opportunity. So meaning is that we go together to advocate for, meet with a bank to advocate for access to capital, and we go together to do a chicken dinner situation or a fish fry or crab feed to and then because then you engage a young entrepreneur and you say, I've got 2,000 for you here. I've got 10,000, 100,000, 3 million, what have you. Do your worst. That's how everybody else gets to do it, right? So I think in terms of our collective power, being able to advocate for access or just go get the bag together, right, in the sense of creating that access to capital. So.
That's, I think, like that's the number one challenge that you have as an entrepreneur. And that's the number one thing that we're talking about, is that our kids are creating things that they don't have ownership over. And then the world, like Fortnite, is taking their dances and putting them and monetizing them and making billions. So the collaboration around beautiful storytelling to tell a story that can attract the Oprahs and the whoever's of the world in order to fund initiatives created by African Americans that are reaching our communities in ways that others aren't, is probably the number one and most important thing that can happen. And it does take the entire ecosystem of partners. It takes the people that say, we're going to implement this. It takes the people that say, we're willing to create this. We'll be the tech geniuses that are doing this part. It takes the storytellers to help craft that story that makes it actionable for everybody in the room. It takes the corporations that are saying, we want to hire, and the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion to say that we're going to focus on this. So access to capital, I think, like, is the number one barrier that we need to unlock, because capital allows us to own the works that we create, as opposed to being the thought leaders and then the rest of the world taking what we're doing and not applying it to our communities.
And the way that you can do that often is through data, right, and research. And so I think collaborating to figure out what those research questions are and the kind of data that needs to be collected to, make these cases to whoever it is, right, who holds the bag, right, like, to get it. But yeah, collaborating in that sense of what kind of data do we need to produce, what kind of questions do we need to be asking.
I think it really is, I would say, again, trust your instinct, give yourself the credit, and also give your young people the credit in the sense of, so, I was able to go to our first AI track session for our Oakland cohorts last week, and they just started with kind of the basics, just basic terms, et cetera, but then they had an entire section on how it gets built, and like just asking questions on, well, what would need to be true about this tech for it to have been built this way, or like what else would need to be true for it to be built a way you'd like to see. And they just start asking questions. Well, so and such is built this way, but I heard about that one thing and it can't see my face or can't recognize my skin, or, and then you're like, well, why is that? Like, well, then it must not have been us who built it, or they didn't test it on us. Well, why is that, right? So by the time they get to, they didn't touch a computer that day, right? It was just about talking about their experience, and they were talking, these young people, right? Like, we weren't saying this is and turn to page 3 and the whole thing and then you read it. So like in that sense, as you begin your experience in this coming term and all that, I think you have the opportunity to just anchor, like, okay, what are going to be the benefits of this, the limitations, like how can we think about how we would make it better as we go? Like, that's a lesson within a lesson, but I think it really anchors in just understanding that you don't have to have been, a PhD in, machine learning, right, to understand at the core, like, how things are working. And then also these young people, as they get excited, they'll start bringing probably information back. Like, who can tell me how this got built this way? Can we tap in 2 or 3 weeks and extra credit for anybody who could, like, walk us through it? And then that creates another opportunity and another pathway for them.
Even on that. So one word, what do you want this audience to walk away with?
Media literacy, kind of to this question, AI, algorithmic bias literacy, and ethics. And ethics. I'm trying.
You didn't say it the parent node or the child node, right? She had 3 on the parent.
3+.
Yeah.
3+. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do 3 words. Since we're not doing 3 words. We're not doing 3 words. I believe AI in video games represents the new gold rush. And for the first time ever, we have the opportunity to be a part of what's being created, because it's not created yet. We're building it. So dig in. Get ready.
African diaspora goals.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.